Welcome, everybody. Today we're going to talk about authentic digital assessment. For those of you who are just joining our webinar series today, my name is Haley Huberty, and I'm the Professional Development Manager at Creative Learning Systems. Creative Learning Systems is a company based in Longmont, Colorado, and we design learning spaces to support individualized project-based learning. So it's everything from the furniture to the technology, to the kits and materials that students use, all the way to training and install. So we cover a lot, but we really want to support you guys in bringing digital learning to your schools, to your kids. And so today we're going to talk about digital assessment. So first off, I want to start with kind of viewing assessment through a couple different lenses and different purposes of assessment. When we talk about assessment of learning, that's where we traditionally think about summative assessments. So it's that snapshot of where kids are, what they've learned over a period of time, and it's usually, then reported on their report card or to their parents. Assessment as learning, we're looking at that assessment as an opportunity for students to learn some skills, to practice and self-correct, and it also usually requires some collaboration between students. So you could think of that as like a lab where students are implementing skills, figuring out how things work, and potentially working with a group to accomplish that. Assessment for learning is really where assessment is being used to identify where students are in their learning process and where they need to go and how they're going to get there. So it's really more of a formative assessment. That's what the purpose is for. And it involves, the students and the teacher identifying evidence of learning and using that to inform next steps. We're going to really be looking at assessment as those last two components when we talk about authentic assessment. So when you look up authentic assessment, you're going to see a lot of different definitions. A lot of them talk about applying skills to real-world tasks or real-world applications. And you'll also see some definitions that talk about the learning process. So not looking just at a snapshot of students learning or understanding, but looking at that whole process and how they grow over time. So we're really going to be talking about authentic assessment in those two different realms. Where you want to start is with authentic tasks and designing these in a way that students can complete them in the digital space. So first you'll want to identify standards or skills to be addressed. That's going to be your content, but also thinking about those standards and skills that are going to have real-world applications. A next good step is determining how it's going to be applied in a meaningful way. So as you are designing those tasks, think about how they can apply it, but also in a way that they can do it in the digital space. So does it require an online tool that they can use? Think about online articles and resources you may pull in to support that. But keep those pieces in mind, those digital tools that you may use as they apply it. And the last thing is just designing a task around a real world scenario. So if they were taking those skills out into the real world, what might be something that they would actually do with it, and setting up that scenario for them to solve, or a problem or a challenge to solve. At Creative Learning Systems, we're all about making things student-directed. So the more you can make it student-directed, the better. And you can support that by giving students the choice to decide how they're going to apply it. So they can bring in their own interests, passions, maybe what they want to be when they graduate and enter a career, and allow them to decide how they're going to apply those skills. An example of this could be, if you have students who need to apply skills about area and perimeter, and that's used all the time by architects, by designers, by landscapers. even by like sewers, seamstresses. And so you could then design a task where students have to use, maybe a certain amount of material to design a house. So they only have so much flooring or so much drywall. So those are the kinds of tasks that you could design for your students.
So some characteristics of high quality authentic assessment, authentic tasks, you want to think about, like, can it be approached in multiple ways? Can kids tackle that task with different perspectives, different ideas, different interests? And will the end results be different? So an authentic task, kids will end up with different projects, and that's a good indicator. Also encouraging collaboration, whether that's group or they're just relying on other people or relying on community resources, and times to reflect and improve their project over time. Another thing is that, really good authentic tasks also are easily integrated with other content areas. So it could pull in research articles that they have to use to learn about architectural design, or it's going to also incorporate some scientific method and testing their design. So think about incorporating those components too as you design your tasks. Moving a little bit more into authentic assessment, how you approach the learning process and assessing that. High quality authentic assessment encompasses the entire learning process. So thinking about where the student starts at the beginning of the experience and how they've grown. Kind of compared to not including the entire learning process, when a kid submits a paper, like if you just look at that paper according to the rubric, but if you're looking at the entire learning process, you may be analyzing all of their different drafts. How have they improved their writing, their essay over time? What processes did they go through? What components did they focus on? And that being part of the assessment. It's also growth oriented. So again, looking at where they started to where they ended, and not necessarily just whether they met a benchmark at the end or a standard at the end. It also includes meaningful success criteria or objectives. And hopefully students are involved in both the assessment process, so determining whether they think they have met certain standards or certain criteria, and being included in that process the whole way. And really good authentic assessment, kids are able to self-assess through the entire process. And that's kind of where Matt Renwick's gold standard for authentic assessment comes in. He says students should develop their own plans for holding themselves accountable and measuring the success of their endeavors. And that's really where, like, they're very student directed, they're owning their learning, and they're able to drive it to get it there. And it doesn't just rely on the teacher's feedback or prompting them to improve. So instead of waiting to get, their grade back and what they need to work on, they're already assessing that and making plans and setting up goals to get there, to improve it, just based on what they identify. To get started with authentic assessments, here's some different components that you could pull into your digital learning. First, of course, starting with an authentic task. That could be, solving a problem or a challenge. For those of you who have already requested access to our curriculum, you'll see that we give kids challenges where they design a project to solve the challenge, and a lot of them are, applied to real world scenarios. You can also share with your students a student-facing rubric. So allowing them to look at kind of where their goal is by the end of the project, where they should be aiming for, and using that rubric throughout their project to improve, to evaluate where they are in each of those components, and constantly improving their work, to reach that end goal. Again, designing success criteria, having students involved in that can be really powerful. In our labs, we have students design SMART objectives. So that's how they're going to accomplish the challenge. And it allows them to customize it based on their interests. And so then you increase motivation, but they also have ownership over the project and what it looks like to be successful with that project. Self-assessment is really important throughout the entire process. And then having the teacher involved in that and giving kind of your feedback and having a discussion about where the students are and how they can keep improving. But that's a really important component throughout the whole thing. That could be a quick, you know, hey, look at this one component. I want you to think about that today as you work. How can you improve that? Where are you in, you know, this like target range? Getting feedback from peers is another way that you can pull in some assessment. And then digital portfolios. There's a couple different types of portfolios that you may want to consider if you choose to use portfolios. Performance is kind of like students' best work, and students are in charge of selecting that work and defending why it represents their best work in either that area or topic. A process portfolio is really great because it includes all versions of some piece of work or project. So then the students are able to evaluate how they're progressing and how they're growing their work and quality over that time. And then a third type is progress, and that's usually managed by teachers. That's kind of your typical portfolio that teachers may put together and then, you know, share at parent-teacher conferences, but it shows a student's develop over time. So that's their development maybe over the whole year or over a quarter. And it's going to be looking at, you know, a lot of different components, a lot of different projects. A process portfolio is a really great place to start where students can put their revisions of a project. And then they're you know, they can monitor that. And there's that self-assessment piece that comes in. So those are some places where you can get started with assessment. I do have a couple of folks on the line who I want them to share a little bit about their experience. Let's see, Victor, will you share a little bit about your experience with authentic assessments?
Sure. Thanks, Haley. So, hi, everybody. I'm Victor. I'm the Vice President of Academic Services here at Creative Learning Systems. And I've been kind of tuning in the background in all of these webinars and sometimes in the foreground if there's technical issues. So apologies for that. But in terms of authentic assessment, there's some things that you guys really should know. And some of it is that it's different, right? Like it is just a different animal. And the reasoning there is that you really have to drill down and think about what you want kids to focus on. So the assessment rubrics and things like that we have and that we use as a company are almost performance-based. And so then you can look at kind of what the context of a good deliverable is rather than the content of that good deliverable. And so then that authentic assessment, you're more assessing like that the students are learning and that they're getting through things, but you're not necessarily giving them direct feedback on all of the content necessarily, depending on your focus. And so it is a very different program. It's kind of just the way it works. Like I remember having different sixth grade kids who would come in and say, you know, like for my e-portfolio and for my assessment, I want to do a poster board. Great. And so they would show me, you know, the life cycle of a sea turtle on a poster board. Great. That's excellent. But then I'd also have kids that would go through and they'd do a full interactive website, same age, same group of kids. And so it really just depends on where the kids are at and adjusting your assessment standards based on the level of achievement of your students. And as we're in this kind of weird digital place, you know, the digital divide is real at the moment. And you're going to see kids that have resources at home and you're going to see kids that don't. And so being open to seeing those resources, no matter how they're coming and what form they're coming in, you know, like that kid who builds a bridge out of sticks that they gather in their yard versus the one who builds them out of popsicle sticks that their mom purchased at the store, you know, and I mean, like being able to look at both of those and analyze them from an authentic learning perspective is really what you're going to want to focus on. So that's really kind of my 2 cents, but it really echoes a lot of what Haley has contributed there.
Awesome. Thank you, Victor. And then I also wanted Philip Mayhofer. He also works for us at CLS. He'll introduce himself to share a little bit about his experience as well.
Hello, I am Philip Mayhofer, and I am the Senior Smart Lab Designer with Creative Learning Systems. And prior to my time at CLS, I taught in an IB school in Boulder, Colorado, teaching middle school design. And a big part of our focus in our professional development during the final year of my teaching there was emphasizing authentic assessment and how to make sure that we're assessing what really matters in students' learning. And a big part of that related to the opportunities that we give students to share what they're learning. That's a big part of our process, our learning process at Creative Learning Systems, in giving students the opportunity to share their learning in authentic and real ways. As a teacher myself, I often struggled to figure out ways that my students could share their projects with people with relevant experience in those fields. And right now we have an additional challenge of not being able to gather together to share. And so it becomes important for us as educators to identify ways that students can share not only with each other, but also interact with experts in the fields that they're exploring, in the topics that they're exploring with our curriculum, like digital communications and engineering. Giving students the opportunity to network is going to be very important so that they can share what they're learning through those portfolios that they're building, so that you as educators can then understand the processes that they've gone through, and then also understand how they're communicating about their learning itself. And that's a big part of what I tried to do as a teacher, and it's a big part of our learning process at Creative Learning Systems as well.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, sharing is definitely an important part. Makes it, really meaningful to kids for sure. Thanks. I see there's a question about student-facing rubrics. So we have self-assessments that we share with our students, and it's designed for them to go through, and then the facilitator kind of follows up with their assessment. But this would be shared with the student. They would own this document. For each of the components, it gives them descriptors for 4, 3, 2, 1, what it feeds into. The students score themselves, and then they determine what they did well and what they could do better. But this is something that is important to share at the beginning, so they know what they're going to be assessed on. And then depending on what you're assessing, it may be helpful to have them check in with this rubric throughout their entire project or kind of learning process. So it's something that, has kid-friendly language on it and isn't just used by the teacher at the end of the project cycle or unit or lesson. If anyone else is on the line and would like to share any of their experiences with authentic assessment or ask questions, please raise your hand and we'd love to hear from you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I'm Kath and I'm in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and I'm the facilitator of the lab there. What I have found really, really good is, of course, when you have student buy-in, it's a game changer. But also when you allow the students to do peer assessment and allow them to defend themselves in front of a panel of their peers, it makes for something really authentic, and they're very hard on themselves and on each other, far harder than probably we would be, but it really ups the ante.
Awesome. Thank you, Kath. Yeah, that's awesome. I think that defending portion is super important. Being able to provide some evidence to show that they have, you know, like why they're grading themselves the way that they are.
Yes, exactly. And also, what I have found key is allowing them to allow themselves to say that, for example, they did not like one rotation, and they can defend their belief and what caused them not to like it, and what they tried to overcome, or why they felt they struggled so hard. So it really opens up a real it's a real life thing, where you have to see, well, let's see why it went wrong.
Exactly. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Kath.
You're welcome.
I see that Kenneth, you have a question. You're unmuted, so you should be able to talk. You might have to unmute yourself. All right, technical difficulties maybe. If you figure it out, feel free to just speak up. If there's any other questions, feel free to send it in the chat. You can raise your hand. Again, experiences, any questions you have as you think about implementing some of these things. I will be sending out an email. Oh, there you go. Hey.
Oh, you can hear me now?
Yep, I can hear you.
Oh, hi, Haley. Is it Haley, right?
Yep, you got it.
Oh, good. I'm Kenneth Stanton. I'm a graphic designer with IATSE and the president of Local 1, the Industrial Painters Union. And
okay.
My experience with the assessments, the learning assessments, come from my family. We have small children, and a handful of them have been in the IEP programs with their elementary schools. So they get assessments, learning assessments, and this right here is a good project to do with students to help build confidence that might have learning disabilities or a slower learning process than others, just like everyone else said. So
yeah, definitely, it lets them set their own goals that are meaningful to them, and problem solve. And yeah, it's interesting. A lot of times, it's really cool, like the smart labs that we design and put into schools. We hear a lot about a very diverse population of students who are able to be successful there because of the way that it's designed and the way that it's assessed. So it's really great to be able to see everyone succeed in whatever goals they set and just making growth from where they start. So that's awesome.
yeah. Yep, it is. That was all.
All right, well, thank you, Ken. Okay, thanks, Kenneth. It looks like, let's see, we've got a Q&A. So the digital piece, with doing it online, I will share some examples of portfolios. So putting portfolios online, that's going to be a great place to start. And I think starting with a journal too that includes reflection and the ability for students to document their process and how their understanding has evolved. Google Slides and Google Docs is a great place to start. Again, giving that feedback through commenting or whatever platform you're using. That's going to be really great, a really great digital piece. And then the assessment as well. So being able to put your rubrics online and giving them that feedback there. If you're looking at that sharing piece, that could be publishing it to an audience, and whether that's to the school community, to peers. You could do a Zoom meeting where everyone shares the projects they've been working on. That's one way that you could kind of pull that sharing piece into the digital space.
Well, and just to add to that, Haley, there's, the way you interact with digital assessments, and especially authentic ones, can be, it has to be genuine. So if you're a teacher in a room and you're giving things to a student, use the technology that you know. I mean, like you just don't have enough time right now to become an expert in Google Classroom and Google Groups and all those things, 360 Teams, whatever it is. And so, you know, use a Word document and use email if you know how to do those things, or, you know, have your students take pictures of items and mail them to you. And however that works for you, so that you can get all of that stuff in whatever digital format is the most convenient. Like, you might actually find that it's easier for your kids to just pick up a cell phone and quickly record a video and send it to you explaining what they did and how they did it. And honestly, that may be more valuable for you as a teacher than that kid sitting down and figuring out how to put it in Google Classroom. And so it really is just whatever way is easiest and whichever way is the fastest for you to get that feedback from the kid and get back to them in an authentic way.
Exactly. Awesome. All right, any other questions or comments before we kind of sign off for today? All right, well, thank you all for joining us. Again, tomorrow we are going to cover, let's see, we are covering resources and tools. Let me see real quick if I can pull up my last slide. There we go. If you'd like access to the curriculum, you can email our support team. There's also a link to the form. I'll be sending out this. You'll get access to the slides. But then also when you close your webinar window, it will bring up a link where you can submit to get access to our curriculum so that you can engage your students in student-directed PBL that's all online and uses online resources. Tomorrow, again, we're doing activities and resources that you can use to get started with digital learning. And on Monday, we're talking about how to adapt to digital learning and kind of that change in environment. And it looks like we've got one more question. Yep, Eileen, yesterday's webinar is available. I will link that in the email so that you can access both yesterday's webinar and Tuesday's webinar. So I'll send you links to those, as well as registration links for the next two. If you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. You'll get my email when I send out that, that follow-up email. You can also always email us at support@clsonline.com, and they'll route it to whoever can answer your question. Thank you all for joining us, and hopefully we'll see a bunch of you tomorrow at our next webinar.